Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EX Conversation. In this episode, I sit down with one of my long-standing friends in the industry, Advita Patel, and we deep dive on her latest book, Decoding Confidence, looking at some of the skills and capabilities internal communicators need in order to thrive as business leaders. So let's get into it. Hi, Advita, and welcome to the EX Conversation.
Hi, Cass. Really excited to be here today.
Nice. I am looking forward to this conversation. I know we've got some particularly exciting topics to get into. But before we get into them, I want to take a journey backwards and understand a little bit about your career in internal communication and some of the things that have happened along that journey. I've read some about it online as well, because your posts are really interesting, and it's really interesting to see how your career developed throughout certain parts of your life. So I want to hear from you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've got a little bit of a wiggly career and a bit of a bumpy one. I think it's quite common based on the conversations I've had with other internal comms folks. But I actually studied information tech when I was at university. So I wanted to be a coder. And I wanted to do software stuff. I know, I was really interested in tech, and still am, to be fair, really interested in tech. So I learned how to do, in those days, C++, JavaScripting, learning how to create a website completely from scratch using HTML. We didn't have all these kind of fancy things that you can do today. So I completely was obsessed with computers and the ability to be able to communicate with people outside of the world that we lived in, like the country we lived in. And I was at the age, which kind of shows how old I am now, is where MSN first came out. So I was like 15, and my dad brought the computer home for the first time. Like, we had a family computer and a modem that took about 6.5 years to connect. But, you know, we had patience in those days. And that's what kind of evoked my curiosity in communication, actually, how we communicate across different cultures, different personalities. I had pen pals all over the world. And I think that I kind of always had that communication mindset. I was a really good writer at school, but the teacher at school was quite realistic, I would say. You know, I went to a comp school in a bit of a deprived area of Manchester, and the thought of doing anything outside of what the common work situations were in that place wasn't the right thing for someone like me, especially a young person of colour who stood out. Amongst people who were quite from a dominant culture. So IT was the situation I was in at that time, because I just wasn't very good at chemistry or biology, so I couldn't go down the traditional. My parents would have they would have loved it if I became a doctor or something like that. And I remember I got a job in a pharmacy, because I was going to do pharmacy at university. So I worked at Boots the chemist on a Saturday, learning how to be a pharmacist so I could get all my work experience. And oh my goodness, Kaz, that job. It was, I mean, I don't want to disrespect that entire profession, but it was not creative. It was, even the pharmacist, Nigel, his name was, who used to work there, even he was like, "Are you sure you want to do pharmacy at university?" And then I did my chemistry A-level, and that was all ruined for me, because chemistry, I still get PTSD from it. The chemistry A-level is just not recommended. And if anyone ever studied chemistry at A-level, well done you. I bow down. So I did IT, graduated. And unfortunately, the year I graduated, we went through a massive dot-com crash, and they were not hiring people at all, and they definitely weren't hiring a young Asian woman from the north of England to do any coding. So I ended up getting in this awful job, which was kind of pitted as an IT job, but I was just horrific. And I got bullied in that job, and I didn't actually know it was bullying. Because my parents always kind of worked for themselves. So they never had, we never had conversations about CEOs, COOs, line managers, performance reviews, none of that. That wasn't language we used in our home. It was always like profit and loss and entrepreneurship and marketing, that kind of stuff. So I didn't know it was bullying. And it was only probably about 6 months later, my parents, who are, really busy in their day jobs, noticed that I wasn't myself. And my dad called me into his office at the back of they had a mini supermarket. They called me at the back in the office and said, "You're not yourself, and we want to know why you're not yourself. What's going on?" And for Asian parents, Kaz, to notice that I wasn't myself, and I say this in jest, but they're busy people, right? And mental health and stuff in those days was just not a big thing that we spoke about openly at all. But my dad and my mum to notice that I wasn't myself was quite a significant, I would say, part of my life at that time. And I realized at that moment that I never ever wanted to be in a situation where I wasn't myself, and I never wanted to be stuck anywhere. So I vowed to myself that I would work really hard and build a career where I could escape and exit as quickly as I could. And then I ended up getting an admin job, I think, like you do when you're a bit stuck. Worked at a university, was taken under the wings of a marketing manager called Catherine, who ended up being my informal mentor. And then I started to study for a HR master's, doing human resources. And then about 3 months into that master's, Catherine, the marketing manager, said, "You've got a knack. You've got a knack for marketing. You should really think about setting yourself up in that career, because I can see like you shining in that space." So I transitioned from my HR master's into strategic marketing and did that master's part-time while I worked full-time. And then the first job I applied for was marketing officer. But when I started that role, it was actually internal communications. And I didn't know what internal comms was then, really. And it was only when I kind of dug a bit deeper and started to follow a few people on when Twitter was a lovely place to be on, and I connected with a few other internal comms pros, I realised that it was actual profession, and people actually made careers out of it. So I ended up kind of sticking it out. I did a few little bits and pieces in between. I did some media relation stuff. I'm terrible at it. Not my bag at all. But internal comms and employee experience had my heart. And it's 20 years this year that
Wow.
I'm celebrating my career in internal comms, and I've never really left it since then.
It's kind of crazy how when you look back, the kind of impact of certain people like mentors, and like someone saying something at the right time can really lead and put you in a direction which like seems right. Um, so obviously you originally did IT, right? Or that was kind of the path you were going down. Um, I mean, even today, there's still trying to get like women and more women into IT, and I can imagine at that time that sort of profession was something like it's kind of rebellious or atypical of you to kind of do that. Was that something that was like always in your nature, or was that something that came along the journey?
Do you know what's really funny? I never really thought of myself as rebellious when I was younger, but I think I had to be based on where I grew up. You know, I grew up in a horrific racist area of Manchester. I've written about it. It's no secret. And we actually, you know, we had like our windows smashed in, we had fireworks through the letterbox, we had like mice put in there, we had a panic alarm fitted by the police. And I say this a bit, it was trauma. I'm not dismissing how traumatic it was, but you kind of had one or two choices. Well, I did, you know, in terms of how was I going to let this define me? And I had to be in that time a bit rebellious into standing up for myself. I didn't, you know, it was just me and my sister at home. My parents worked 365 days a year, 12-hour, 14-hour days. So we were at home on our own a lot, and she's my younger sister. So I had to be the kind of, you know, the supporter and stand up for the kind of attacks we were getting and build that confidence at that time. Even though at the time I still felt quite weak and meek, if you know what I mean. Like we used to kind of sneak out the back door and keep our lights switched off. But I realised, reflecting back, that actually I did like brave at 13, 14 years old with these grown men and older teenagers like messing about outside, like opening the door, going, "Go away, what are you doing?" You know, like it's quite a bold thing to do at that age as a young person and a young female. And there was nothing like we have today, like social media and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like I could like text my mate and go, "Oh, do you want to come round?"
Yeah.
So yeah, so that kind of, I think that kind of stemmed up the rebelliousness. But do you know what I learned, which I realized when I was in my early 30s, I learned just to conform quite quickly. And I realized that if I just pretended that I liked what they liked and and liked all the music they liked, did the things they did, go out clubbing, staying out late, pretending to be like them, then I'll be accepted. And it's true, I was. And my rebellious side was kind of hidden then, I would say. Like, I conformed a lot just to fit in. I think when you spent so much of your early teenage years being excluded and not fitting in and being told to kind of go back to where you came from, you do everything in your power to belong, and that kind of forms you as a person. And my rebelliousness, I think, got kicked out of me in my mid-teens. When a teenage girl, you just want to fit in and you want to be going out with your mates and hanging out at Mackie D's and those things that you did in like late mid to late 90s and stuff like that. So I would say that, yes, I think when I was younger, I was definitely more rebellious. I stood up for myself, had an opinion about everything. That kind of got kicked out of me in my mid-teens because I realized being rebellious and speaking up was not going to help me succeed in that environment that I was in. And keeping a low profile and not saying anything just allowed the attacks to stay away. People just accepted me like, oh, she's not one of them. That's literally what people used to say. Like, I remember going to my friend's caravan in where was it? I think it was Rhyl in North Wales, and I met her granddad for the first time, and he was proper on a racist rant about these immigrants and all that, and using the P word and everything. And I was sat there, like, eating my toast, I think. And he looks over and he goes, oh, I don't mean you, though. You're different. And it was just kind of accepted. And I think that's, and I'm very open about that because I think it defines us as an individual. I don't think it's anything to be embarrassed about or shamed about or not talk about, just to stop other people feeling uncomfortable. Because that's what I find when I talk about the racism and the behaviors I face, other people feel uncomfortable on my behalf. I'm like, that experience in my life and the person I am today that's how I was defined, by the experiences I had, and I don't think that's anything that anyone should ever shy away from.
Yeah. I think there are these certainly for you, and I think there are like these like formative markers on the journey that like really
Yeah.
yeah, do have an impact and create who you are as a person. Like, I kind of like see that in front of me, but obviously there are some like positive things about that as well. Like, obviously you're talking more about confidence as well. We'll kind of get into that. You spoke about how like conformity was something that's like, I can imagine that, especially as you got into like more corporate workplaces and things like that, conformity kind of just got more and more there, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, trust me to choose a profession where conformity was encouraged. Like, with the comms, we're like the poor relations of PR, aren't we, often? And we're kind of just trying to just belong and fit in. And I used to call myself the communications chameleon because I was like, I can just kind of win people over and influence and do what they say and not really challenge too much because I want to fit in and belong. And I think internal comms folks, the ones I know and spend a lot of time with, we've all had very similar experiences in that space. Like, we talk about nowadays, we are talking about more of like saying no more and putting boundaries in place and not letting people define who you are and telling you how to do your job. I'm really sorry, but 20 years ago, that was not an option for internal comms. Like, we had to conform if we wanted to be seen as qualified and professional and helping leaders do their job well. The thought 20 years ago to turn around to a leader at that time and go, I'm sorry, that's not part of my job description. I'm not doing that. Like, that would never have happened. It just wasn't accepted, and it wasn't a thing that was encouraged in the industry either at the time. In the industry, we were told to work with leaders, build relationships with them, learn to get to know them a bit more. And that's true still today. I'm not saying it isn't, but there's definitely a little bit more rebelliousness in the last 10 years in internal comms about who we are and what position we should have around that boardroom table. Not even we need a seat at that table. That conversation, I do believe, is kind of moving on now. I think internal comms folks, especially the new generation coming in, are much more kind of fighting for their value and their worth and standing up for themselves, which is the right thing to do. But we are still, conforming to what the business needs us to do. And we probably don't challenge as hard as our marketing friends would do or as our external comms friends would do. We're still on the edge, I would say, and we're still very careful about how we position ourselves. And I encourage the challenge, but it's not as easy, I would say, from an internal comms perspective to do that because everyone's an expert. So you're dealing with unofficial experts in the business that you have to manage and work with to win them over. So they invite you in to conversations. External comms don't necessarily always have to do that because people are frightened of the media and external things. And marketing can prove their value through their outcomes that they deliver and the customer base and all of that. They can demonstrate how they can link to the revenue generation. It's still very difficult for internal comms to do that. So we have to be a bit more smarter about how we demonstrate our measurement, how we demonstrate the value that we bring. And it's not that easy, I would say, to be as gruff as you should be to get that space around that table.
So is that the kind of thread that led you into starting to write about confidence as a way to support the function? Tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
kind of journey into starting to write and articulate what you think about what we do and how to do it better.
Yeah. So 100%. So I realized that in 2018, I had what can only be described as a confidence crash. I started to doubt my ability. I started to doubt whether I belonged in the industry. I really didn't believe in my worth and my value anymore. And on the outside, I was seen as this quite extroverted individual who could hold her own in conversations and in meetings and, challenge respectfully leaders and all of that kind of stuff. You wouldn't have never had suspected that internally the self-doubt was making me doubt my abilities in the work that I was doing, which kind of I realized was holding me back. I spent majority of my career, Kaz, waiting for permission and validation. That is literally what I spent probably 14 years of my career waiting for. So when my line manager said to me, Advita, you're ready for the next phase, I went. I never, ever put myself out there on my own accord. I always waited for someone to tell me I was good enough, whether that's a mentor, a line manager, a leader. And I realized in 2018, when I was going through that confidence crash, that I kind of lost my identity in this game that I was playing, being this communication chameleon. I forgot who I was. Who was I? All my life I'd been defined by other people, by the racists, that she's, she doesn't belong here, by my teachers, she's quiet and studious, I wish more students were like her. By my parents who just wanted me to just crack on and not make a fuss because they've been taught not to make a fuss when they came to this country. And I forgot who I was. And I think regardless whether you are underrepresented, marginalized or whatever, I think every single human being goes through that phase because you're kind of always told who you are. Even in work, you have your performance review and your line manager kind of tells you who they need you to be to succeed in that workplace, right? You need to have more gravitas here. You need to be more building relationships there. You need to speak up a little bit more. You need to, contribute your creative ideas here. And in all that kind of mixing and matching, you kind of forget who you are. And that's what happened to me. And then I started my confidence journey. Started to investigate what imposter syndrome was. Why do we have this feeling of self-doubt and struggle with it? And the more internal comms people I spoke with, I realized it's quite common in this field where we kind of start doubting our abilities because we get so much pushback quite a few times and we don't know how to manage that pushback and we take it personally and we kind of forget what we're trying to do and then we kind of just get into a little bit of the shadows and start retreating. The internal comms folks, as you'll know, Kaz, are probably one of the humblest folks you'll ever meet. They'll never want to shout about their success. They'll never want to talk about the great stuff they've done. We're always kind of helping other people succeed. Leaders to share their messages well, colleagues and employees feeling like they're connected to the objectives of the business, CEOs who can be seen as trusted. That's what we do. We never put ourselves in the limelight. And some would argue that we shouldn't, but we should still believe in our value. And investigating confidence and all that over 2 years, and I started Comms Rebel, which was a bit of my kind of two fingers up, I have to admit, to everything I'd experienced to say, I'm going to be rebellious in the world of comms. I'm going to think differently about how people deliver internal comms, and I'm going to be a little bit out there and more than what others would say. And I remember getting lots of people saying to me, oh, rebel's a bit of an uncomfortable word to put in your business name. People probably won't hire you because they'll think you're going to be a disruptor. And I said, yeah, good, because I am. I'm a positive disruptor. Einstein was the one that said, expecting to see something change, but delivering the same thing over and over again is a sign of insanity. And that's what I think sometimes internal comms is. Like we're trying to do the same thing, but expecting different results. We just package it differently, right? And we just don't think actually, what impact are we trying to make? And then when I started to get involved in Comms Rebel and started to build my business in that area, I got involved in inclusion and D&I. Because it was an area that I cared about when I was working in internal comms, and I worked very closely with HR on these areas. But it became more defined when George Floyd's murder happened in 2020. And Priya Bates, who's my co-founder for A Leader Like Me, both of us were asked quite a few questions by comms pros about how to manage it. And I started to get more involved in inclusion and inclusive cultures. And I realized, and this is where the epiphany hit me, Kaz, was confidence was the barrier for success and inclusion 90% of the time. It was leaders fearing getting things wrong. It was colleagues not being able to speak up because they doubted themselves. It was the environment not feeling psychologically safe. And if you really stripped everything back, the underlying problem was self-belief and confidence in their abilities. And I started to investigate the habits of leaders who demonstrated great work and performed really well and thrived, and their teams thriving. And there were some habits that they were portraying that really helped them be who they were and help their team be who they needed to be.
So you obviously kind of had this like personal journey. So you kind of experienced that as a person, but then you tried to, with the book, you tried to kind of like formalize and categorize and kind of like back it with research and stuff. What are some of the, tell me a bit more about that process and like some of the interesting things unexpected things you found along that journey.
I think one of the biggest epiphanies for me when I started my confidence journey was this belief that to be confident, you had to be outspoken, you had to be loud, you always had to put yourself out there, you had to be the center of attention. And that's how people defined confidence, right? That they're loud, they're out there, they're direct, they're whatever. That's the confident person. That person's quieter, a little bit more reserved, not speaking up as much as that other person. So they obviously don't have confidence. And that was the conditioning that I think we all have in the world that we're in. And what I realized, and the biggest kind of discovery in my research, was those kind of loud characters that we often see are the ones who struggle the most with self-esteem and self-doubt, and are masking their insecurities and covering up their tracks so they don't get uncovered or found out. And the ones who are comfortable in their own skin, are a little bit more reflective and more steadier and contribute as and when they needed to, tended, not always, but tended to have more confidence in their self belief and who they were as an individual, and didn't feel like they had to put on a show to be seen and heard. And I would say I'm in the middle of, I don't like the words introvert and extrovert because I think it's 100% dependent on the environment that you're in. I think an introvert person can be extrovert in a space they feel safe. An extrovert person can be a bit quieter in a space where they don't feel safe, right? So those terms, I think, are not right. And I think most of us in my research are in the middle. We can be introvert if we want to be, depending on the situation. We can be extroverted. So that uncovery about what does confidence mean, and realizing that actually confidence isn't about loudness or being over the top, bold. If you want to be like that, absolutely fine. You shouldn't change your personality. But confidence is actually trust. And it's how much do you trust yourself to deal with whatever comes your way in a way that's not going to make you spiral. It's that trust you have in your own abilities and the trust you have in others. And that literally what confidence stands for. It's with trust. That's con is with and findings is trust. And that's what I started to do the research on. It's like, what is trust? Why don't we trust ourselves to do a good job? Why do others not trust us to do a good job? What's going on in this team that they're not trusting each other? And that stems from confidence overall.
And I actually didn't know that about is it like Latin origin?
Latin, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So that kind of makes sense when you say it aloud. Like I I feel like there are certain scenarios, depending on the configuration of the room or what the scenario is. I could be the loudest person in the room, or I could be the quietest. um, and it's kind of interesting how like when you look at it through the lens of trust, it's like, oh, okay, maybe it's to do with like my knowledge on that scenario, or like how well I know those people, or whatever it may be. What are some of the what are some of the kind of like top tips that you would have to to start to move yourself in a more confident direction?
The number one tip, and that's in my new book that's coming out soon, is about self-discovery. A lot of folks don't know themselves well at all. They think they do, and when you really dig deep into that work, you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. You kind of created this scenario narrative based on other people's opinion of you. One thing we all worry about, most of us worry about, I should say, is what other people think about us. And that's what stops us showing up for ourselves. That's what makes us sometimes dim our light to help other people feel more comfortable in our presence. When you do this discovery work, which is why I became certified in things like DISC, those of people who don't know what DISC is, it's a color thing, right? It's called insights in some places, it's red, yellow, blue, green. And people kind of dismiss it a bit because like, oh, it's a personality thing. And, we put labeling people. I don't see it as that way. We're actually helping people identify that people are not difficult. They're just different. And people have a very different way of communicating sometimes. And just because somebody communicates differently to you doesn't mean that they are an idiot or they don't get it. It just means they have a different preference. And if we can all spend a bit more time understanding that, we can help each other build confidence in that work. So self-discovery work is really important. How do you prefer to communicate? What does good look like to you? What you just said there, Kaz, what triggers you in a way? Like when you go into a room, why are you more quieter? Why do you feel like you can't contribute? Is it because of the people in the room? Is it because you're not qualified in that subject as much as you thought you were? Is it because somebody in that room said something to you previously, so you're really conscious of how you're showing up for yourself? All of that matters, and it really makes you kind of define, actually, what do I need to do here to help me be true to myself and trust myself that I've got this. And in my case, it was, I came across as this kind of confident, bubbly character who didn't seem like a wallflower, but I was uncertain of myself. And one of my biggest findings for myself was that I always waited for validation, and I was a people pleaser. I used to stay awake at night worrying about why people didn't say hello to me in the kitchen, or did somebody give me the side eye? Like, why did they give me the side eye? And really worry about it. And I realized actually that can't be my problem, because it's stopping me living my life in the way I want to live it and be the person I need to be my best self at work. And when you stop being your best self at work, you need to start questioning why. What's going on in that workplace that's helping you. And as a leader, which is why the book's in two parts in a way, I've got, as a leader, what your responsibility is. And as a leader, what's your responsibility for your team and for yourself? Because if you're managing people, you've got responsibility to help them be their best that they can possibly be. And if you're stopping them being their best, then what does that say about you ultimately? Because insecurity, it can be a shine up as a toxic trait in many leaders. And that's why that self-discovery work is really important. And I've got and I'll share it with you actually, completely show notes, but I've got a confidence habit gap assessment. So if anybody wants to uncover what habit should I focus on first, where are my gaps, there's an assessment that will kind of give you the results on what areas you focus on, because you can't do all 7 habits together. It's impossible. And some habits you'll be absolutely fine with. You don't need any kind of support in that, because you've kind of nailed it and you know what you're doing. But there may be some habits that you weren't aware of, or you thought you were doing well and thought, actually, I'm not doing this as well as I thought I could be. And what do I need to do to help me build support in this space so I can be the best person I can be and help other people be the best that they can be as well. So
you mentioned these 7 habits. Tell me what those 7 habits are.
So I actually created a mnemonic, because as human beings, we need to have a mnemonic to remember what they are. So it stands under believe. So it's boldness, there's empathy, learning, integrity, empowerment, vulnerability, and energy. And I would say actually that energy is probably one of the most important chapters I wrote in my book, because if you don't have the energy to understand where you're maybe facing burnout, or where you're exhausted, or you're not being able to be the person that you need to be, the other 6 habits are going to be very difficult for you to practice. So I will always say to folks, measure your energy levels, like what's consuming your energy, what's helping you boost your energy, and be quite mindful of that. And then my endorsers who read the book before it went onto the market, I would say 70% of them were like, oh my God, the energy chapter really made me reflect on where I am making mistakes in my own life and career because I'm not considering where the energy is coming from. And I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's really important because we don't think about ourselves. And especially in the world of internal comms and HR, we're so focused on other people and helping other people be the best they can be and helping other people communicate well. We're often the last kind of group to be thought of, because we're the ones that are in kind of midst of the crisis. We're the ones who are kind of helping people do their job well. Nobody really checks in on us and checks if we're doing okay. This is why we have to do that self-compassion and self-empathy and make sure that we're tracking our energy levels throughout the day and throughout the week so you can put contingencies in place to stop you burning out, because so many internal comms folks face burnout, unfortunately.
Do you think there's something we can, do you think there's something we're not doing in the workplace or something we should be doing in the workplace that means some of these habits are more part and parcel of who we are, or we have the right checkpoints in place, or something like that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the earlier when we were chatting about self-advocacy. We're just not very good at advocating for ourselves. Generally, I am generalizing here, but generally we're not very good at it. We struggle to position ourselves as influencers in the workplace. We did a bit of a joke about that seat around that table, but we still talk about that. I'm not being invited into rooms where the conversation is taking place. I'm expected to pick up the pieces afterwards. And when I challenge in my coaching sessions some internal comms folks that I work with, like, what have you done and what have you said? Oh, well, I didn't say anything. Like, they just told me to crack on with it or just do it. And they didn't want to have a discussion. And we're not very good at advocacy. We're good at employee advocacy. We're good at making sure that, the people in the business know who they are and what they need to do. But ourselves, we don't advocate for ourselves as much as we should do. And we really need to be better at that. And a part of that is learning more about business. So my whole thing is we're business leaders with communications expertise. And if we reframe that thinking, we can suddenly start being part of the conversation and we're not just talking about tactics. And that's the trap I think many of us fall into, where we fall into the tactic trap. I'm not saying it's not important. Tactics are important, but leaders want to hear about the business impact. So you doing this, how is that going to help the business? Because leaders generally care about risk, they care about making money, and they care about how do we save money. And if we don't align our thinking to those kind of concerns that leaders have, then we're always going to be on the back foot. And we need to advocate for ourselves. So you need to say to your line manager, I need to go and learn about X, Y, and Z, or I need to go and work shadow here, or I need to go and spend a bit of time with this team, and be a bit more out there with your decision making, because that's what's going to help you with the habits that I just shared with you, and understand what that looks like for you, because everybody is different. Everyone's got different lived experiences. What looks like bold in that culture is going to look very different in that culture, and making assumptions about each other's cultures without doing the research is not helpful, which is why cultural intelligence is a good place to start as well, because we are working in a very small world now, I would say.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that test and working out where I love a little quiz or a test.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to
Me
working out
too.
what I should focus on. Yeah. What's kind of one internal comms skill that you think maybe is underrated or people don't look at typically?
I think that's a really good question. And I believe that most internal comms folks who've been in the profession for a period of time know what good looks like and what good doesn't look like. I believe the struggles we have is that belief in ourselves. And I know that's kind of been the theme of this podcast, but it's really important that we're open about some of the challenges that we may be facing, not fearing speaking up when we're facing adversity, being able to challenge well, and being able to head into productive disagreement. And again, I'm generalizing here, and I know it doesn't apply to everybody, but generally from the conversations I have is that we're generally fairly quite accepting of what other people think about our profession, and we don't challenge as much as we should challenge, and we don't stand up for ourselves as much as we should stand up for ourselves. And I think those are the skills that are kind of missing in our remit of skills that we have. We've kind of got the technical ability. We know what we're doing. We know what a good newsletter looks like. We know how an intranet should function. We know how to, send out good communication and good messaging. But how do we position ourselves as influencers within the work that we're doing? How do we demonstrate that we are good at what we do and stand by, that conviction, so we are heard and we're seen as credible professionals who are doing good work? I would love to give that support to comms folks who just don't know how to do that for themselves. And it is lonely. We're very small teams often. We're normally solo internal comms folks, and we don't really have anyone to bounce things off. So that's why the community element is important. And the work that you folks do at Unily is incredibly important, because you bring these people together so they can talk about these kind of topics and stuff. But yeah, I would say the technical ability side, we're kind of fine. There's lots of resources out there.
Yeah.
Personal skill building is where the struggle is, which is why, as an internal comms person, I wrote a book about confidence, which sounds a bit weird, but it is something I think a lot of our industry does struggle with.
Yeah. And also, I think one thing that you do that I think you mentioned, this community element. And for me, there's the community online and in person that are super supportive. And I feel like so grateful to be part of such a great community. I also really love some of the work you do on LinkedIn, where you talk about, there's lots of crazy stuff going on in the world at the moment, and helping people navigate that, or give your 2 cents on it. Because I feel like sometimes people put the barriers up and you don't hear or see anything. Then as a communicator, you're in a position where you should be doing something. So firstly, thank you, because I feel like some of the stuff you put out is so great and does help a lot of people. But do you ever find that difficult? Because I feel like they're always quite sensitive topics, and it can be easy just not to say nothing, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting, Kaz. I just had a conversation before I came onto this podcast with my 2 co-founders for the Asian Comms Network, where we spoke about the challenges of being an underrepresented person who speaks about the wildness that we're facing in the world today, and being confident enough to speak up about that. What I realize is I have the privilege to be able to do that, because I'm not working for an organization. I have a really supportive network and community. I know people will have my back if the trolls come my way and things like that. And I'm not fearful of what the consequences would be, unlike some individuals who may have that fear. Now, with that said, it is scary to put yourself out there as a woman of color, talking about some of the topics that I talk about. I am putting myself in the line of fire of some of these right wingers who disagree with some of my points of view. But my whole ethos is, as comms people, we have to demonstrate balance, right, in how we communicate. We're not meant to take sides. We may have an opinion, and you're allowed to have one, but and that's a very difficult position to be in, Kaz, right? As an internal comms person, we have to represent the organization that we're supporting and represent the voices of our leaders, and make sure that we're not saying something, whether we agree or disagree with it, that's going to put the reputation at disrepute. So it's really difficult to know, can I talk about this leader who's saying something that is so wild that is making me kind of like cringe and feel really uncomfortable, but yet my team here in this organization are not willing to say something? Can I say something on social media about it? Will they think that I am siding with that person? And it's a hard place to be in politically anyway, when you're working for an organization. So I feel like it's my duty to show up for these people who feel stuck and don't know how to manage those conversations, or how to manage their thoughts around some things that they may be hearing. Because let's be honest, we thought 2020 to 2025 was like wild, right? We were like, the COVID times, the pandemic, it felt like we're living in some kind of weird world. 2026 has just got worse. And we're in this position now where we're dealing with this volatile world. We're dealing with some wild accusations and misinformation and disinformation coming from political leaders and other leaders from other organizations who are obviously not being managed well. And as comms folks, we're in this kind of, what do we do? Like, our colleagues are not feeling safe. Our leaders don't know what to say. There's a lot of fear. So you do need somebody out there. I hope I am that for those people, where I can show and give them some advice and some support, and hopefully make them feel as safe as they possibly can in a world that is quite wild. But that's not to say that it isn't scary. And I'm lucky, as you said, that I have got a community who will back me up, thankfully.
Nice. I'll always back you up.
Thank you.
So I want to move over to our quick fire round and talk a little bit about some trivial things, fun things in the market. I want to start with some quick fire questions. So are you an arrive early or arrive late person?
Late. I try my
Me
best.
too.
In like 5 minutes, it's impossible, but I'm late. I need to work on it.
No.
Is that type
me
B? Is
too.
that type B, man?
You can,
Type B type.
type B. But you've got your confidence habits in check now, so now you can work on the.
I know,
Now you
that's
can
my
work
next
on
book.
Yeah. Instant message or email?
Instant message.
Manchester or anywhere else in the UK?
Manchester, 100%. Yeah.
And who was your favourite Spice Girl?
Oh, God, who was my favourite Spice Girl? I loved Posh. I loved Posh. But I wish I had the fierceness at that age of Scary Spice. So I loved Posh. I really loved her character and everything like that. But I wished I was a bit more fierce, like Scary Spice. So they're my two, definitely.
And what's one piece of advice you wish you'd known at the start of your career? I feel like you kind of answered this throughout, but is there anything else?
It's good. I'm going to say my favourite quote, Kaz. You can't be everyone's cup of tea, otherwise you'll be a mug. That is the best advice I've ever received and heard, and it's true. You can't. Not everyone's going to like you, and not everyone is going to want to like you, and that's okay.
Excellent. And what's so we have this idea of like Room 101, which is like something you want to take from. It could be a physical thing, it could be a concept or an idea, something you'd want to like remove from the industry or think we should like get rid of, basically.
Yeah, I used to watch that program.
Yes, it was great.
Love it, yeah. No, I love it. What would I want to get rid of? Oh, God, I've got to be careful how I tread here.
Yeah.
What would I want to get rid of? I think, you know what? I want to get rid of this kind of woe me attitude we sometimes have in our industry. Like, I get it. Like, I've been in it 20 years now, and it's like fashion trends. They come and go. This whole, I want to see it around the table. I want to be invited. I'm like, bring your own chair and build your own table. Like, we need to move away from that conversation. So I want us to be, you know what? I want us to be more Scary Spice. I want us to be more fierce. I want us to advocate for ourselves, and I want us to stand by our profession. And I want us to remove this kind of woe me, no one's listening to me, no one's inviting me into these conversations, I'm not being heard kind of, rhetoric we have. And I want us to put that in Room 101 and be more fierce as a profession and stand by our conviction, because that is what's going to get us into, with AI and everything, that's what's going to help us thrive and demonstrate that our profession is here to stay.
I agree. And I think the confidence thing, I think, is obviously so important to be as part of that, because it's kind of like, if we're going to back ourselves, it can be easy to get lost in that spiral of like, how do we do this or do that? But actually, like, let's flip the script on that and like be bolder and understand our space and go into those spaces.
You're the expert, right? And we need to own it. I know there's other experts that will say that they know what they're doing because it's internal comms, but I just want every internal comms professional and anyone who works in the space of internal comms to really stand by their conviction and feel proud to do the job that they're doing, and not, and be scary a little bit. Be fierce. That's what I'm saying.
Be fierce. And the question for my last guest is, what hobby do you do outside of work that has an impact on what you do inside work?
Do you know what? I absolutely hate hobby questions because I don't have one. I don't have a hobby, and I really, really berate myself for it. I'm like, I really need to have a hobby. And I've tried everything. I've tried colouring in. I've tried going for like really long walks. And I don't even think that's a hobby. That's a more well-being thing. You know, I've tried all sorts of different hobbies and I can't stick to anything. I've got so many things. So I don't have a hobby as such, but I've really got into well-being recently. Like, I'm not great at meditation. I'm not great at any of that kind of stuff. So any spare time I have, because the work I do, it can be a bit intense sometimes, I spend any spare time just looking after myself. So I'll always kind of, I'll get to the gym as much as I can. I did this couch to 5K last year, and I try and maintain the kind of running and all that kind of stuff, and just look after myself a bit better and spend a bit more time just reflecting and thinking, because I don't do enough of that when I'm busy and got a vibrant job. But if anyone's got any suggestions of what hobbies I could look into, then let me know. But I feel like I've tried almost everything and I just don't stick to anything. I'm really impatient and I get bored quite quickly. So, but I'm open to any hobby ideas. Let me know.
Let us know what hobby you think of me should do.
Yeah.
Or not like my flatmate, where I feel like there's behind the camera right now, there's like loads of different art canvases. I'm like, I know in 2 weeks' time they'll be gone and we'll never see them again.
I know. That's me.
So what question would you like to ask our next guest?
The question I'd like to ask the next guest is, what one book changed your life?
Love it. I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and I'm so proud to be partnering with you on the event as well. It sounds so cool. Lots of interesting ideas and different ways to explore habits, right? Tell me a bit about that, because when you were telling me about it, you're so passionate and there's lots of cool ideas in there. So tell me a bit about the launch event.
I'm so excited that Unilever are partnering with me on this, because I've been to your events ever since you started them and they're just exceptional. So when you said yes, I was like, yay, because it isn't a traditional book launch, it's a book experience. And for me, it was really important that the guests got to experience in real time what confidence is and looks like for them. So I've got like zones in this really kind of arty place in Shoreditch, which I've been told as a Mancunian is quite a cool place to host an event. So I'm going with that.
It is a cool place to host an event.
Loads of people have told me that, oh, that's a really cool place to hold an event. So I've got zones that represent each of the habits I speak about in the book. And you get to experience each of these habits in real time. And you kind of like, I don't want to do forced fun. That's not me at all. But you'll kind of move around the different habit zones and get to participate, if you want to, in different activities that will show you how you can represent yourself under that habit if you feel that's a habit that you don't have or you need to be better at. And I've also done I've also got, I'm not going to give too much away, but there's a few secret activities that are happening. And I've been working on this little secret project that's going to be released, I would say. I'm making it into a bigger deal than what it is. You'll probably see it and be like, what was all this big fuss about? I'm doing like a premiere because there's a cinema room in the venue.
The red carpet, the purple carpet.
I have gone over the top with this, but I'm doing like a little micro premiere on a project I've been working with, because they've got a cinema room in the event space that I'm hosting the event in, and I wanted to use that space properly. So I've just done this thing. So yeah, so I try to make sure that it's as inclusive as it possibly can be, and I want every single human being that walks through that room feeling even more confident than they were when they leave. And that's the whole purpose of the event. So I've got the London event, which is on the in April. Then I've got the Manchester event, because obviously I need to help work with my northern friends as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And when does the book come out for everyone?
5th of May. 5th of May it's out, but you can pre-order now. So if you pre-order, I will love you very much, because it's a big deal for authors pre-orders, because it demonstrates to bookstores that the book is popular. So fingers crossed they put it in the actual physical store. And who doesn't want their book on a shelf when you walk through Waterstones or Barnes and Noble or wherever? So yeah, pre-order, I will. And let me know if you do pre-order. DM me. I'd love to hear that as well.
Thanks, Advita.
Thanks, Kaz.
If you enjoyed that episode, then remember to click to subscribe, because there's much more where that came from. And let us know in the comments which bits you enjoyed and found super insightful. Also, if you would like to be part of the EX conversation and feature on the podcast, then please get in touch.